Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're back to CodeCast by STL Tech Talk, where we're going to bring you the content you want and need: instructional, informative, unique, and insightful commentary on programming, code, and technology. My name is JJ Hammond, and I'm joined tonight by two coding experts. Up first, he is an independent consultant specializing in .NET, web development, and web-based security with almost 20 years of industry experience. The brilliant Brock Allen. Say hello, Brock.
Howdy.
Hello,
hey,
welcome
Brock.
to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. However, this show would not be possible, and I mean that, without my fellow host striving to bring developer knowledge to the masses, and has spent the last 20 years, whoa, you guys are like the 20 years mark, Jesus, architecting and implementing highly scalable ASP.NET applications. Our very own Gus Emery. Hello, Gus, and how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. Hey, JJ. Hey, Brock. Thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate all the time that you give us.
Yeah,
you and every other person.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to have someone else with gray hair.
Just a little bit of it.
All right.
Just a little bit of it.
Just a little bit, yeah. You're not to that point where you're taking out the gray for men or whatever that's called.
Oh no, I passed that years ago.
It's on the shelf behind him.
It's right there.
Yeah. and go follow it. That's hot. And go follow this show and support CodeCast by finding us on Twitter, #CodeCast or @CodeCastSTL. And don't forget, you can interact with the show by sending us feedback to contact@stltechtalk.com. And if you want to take a moment to reach out to us on Twitter, again, that's @CodeCastSTL, and you will be able to reach myself. Want to take a moment to thank the sponsors of the show, Inertia Software, creating cutting-edge, highly scalable Microsoft technological solutions to the energy industry. Visit inertia-software.com. And our good partners, Tech Systems. I all know that your resume to online job boards is crazy, but do you want somebody to help you out with that? Of course you do. Your solution is simple. Tech Systems is the leading IT staffing provider in the United States and is ready to be your career partner. Their goal is to help you achieve your professional goals and personal goals. Contact a local recruiter today at techsystems.com/St. Louis, and that's TechSystems, TEKsystems.com/STLOUIS to find out how they can help you. They're really great. You know, they actually let us know, believe it or not, when somebody goes through our links and clicks on their services and they get staffed at a job. It's wonderful. I love hearing that people are getting jobs. It's great to hear. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off the show for the reason why we're all here tonight, and that's to talk with Brock. Tell us, Brock, what got you into technology and software engineering?
There's obviously a lot of history there, but I was a kid. I used to have like an Atari 800. I used to program in BASIC, and gosh, I must have been 8 or 10 years old back in the 80s with that. And then I played a lot of computer games as a kid, so always into computers. In college, got into computer science, and got into the industry out of college doing that. Security is obviously a sort of a niche section out of writing software, and that's just always been fascinating. It's like really clever things that happen. Someone hacks your site, or you figure out a way to defend, and so security is a really cool subset. And that's the area that basically I've been focusing on for the last 5 or 10 years now.
That's really cool. So what made you transition to just? I mean, because computer science, we all know, because we kind of speak to this audience a little bit, is almost like the doctor field, right? Like like you're specifically professional in one particular area. What made you go ahead and just do the security route? Was it something that maybe happened to you, or?
Yeah, well, no. Fortunately, no. Nothing happened to me.
Good.
But in terms of sort of my background, I had done like C++ and COM and Win32. That was like my prior life. That's where all the gray hair came from.
Right, because C++ will totally do that to a guy.
Absolutely. And then when .NET came out, I moved into web development, and then with everything being online, you start to build apps, and you think developers are like really, for the most part, like very trusting, kind of honest people. They want to get their job done, build their apps for whatever they're trying to do, and they don't think about what the bad guys are doing. And so it's once you get owned that first time, where somebody abuses your app, then you're like, wow, I just totally didn't see that coming. So anyway, that's always, like I said, just always been an interesting sort of aspect to building web apps, is that like every little input into some web page you build, you need to think about how a bad guy is going to abuse that. And so that, that's just like general web security that everybody building web apps really should be aware of. Things like injection attacks, there's cross-site scripting attacks, cross-site request forgery attacks, there's the traditional SQL injection attacks. Those are the things that most people, I don't know if most people defend against, but they should at least know about and be aware of. But that's like one area of security I've really been focusing on specifically for the last 4 or 5 years are things like single sign-on and API-based security. And so those are both kind of related. And that's like the thing, that's like a discipline within a discipline, if you will, that I've been focusing on recently.
Okay. Well, yeah, especially with the emergence of the mobile platforms and different stuff like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. APIs are huge, and that's like the whole mobile device. I mean, or even JavaScript-heavy apps, right? Those kind of fall into the same category, and so they're calling back-end APIs. And it turns out things like just using cookies for those, there are actually security issues with that. And so that's why the concept of token-based security or token-based authentication for APIs is really, really big. And that's what OAuth, if you've heard of that before, that's basically what that's all about, is giving us a way to secure your APIs.
And that would be by passing that token across, right, in your headers or however you're going to pass that across, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of in token, just like a general term for something to prove that you are who you say you are. So like it could be your driver's license, it could be your passport, it could be like your room key for your little plastic room key for your hotel. Those are all kinds of tokens. So we need something similar in software systems like an API, and your app needs to obtain a token and pass it, usually as the authorization header, over your HTTP call to get into the API.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep.
I like that idea. And of course, those tokens, like a couple of the ones that you gave, have a specific lifetime, right? So you can set the lifetime of the token. Your hotel room, you're there for 2 days. After 2 days, it just stops working and you're done. Right?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, the like real world security is often like we build the similar systems in the digital world, so they have exactly the same concept. So tokens have, obviously, like you said, lifetimes. That's one security measure. Another is really interesting is they have this concept of an audience, and an audience means if I get a token and the token says I'm an admin. Maybe that's an admin for one API, but not another API. And so the token has inside of it things like, when I present the token has information about who the intended audience or recipient is. And so again, funny thing, in the real world example of that, I was in Oslo at a conference speaking, and there is an elevator there where you have to wave your room card to go to your floor, but it only allows you to pick the floor that you're on. So in other words, cool. I have a token, and I can't go to the 3rd floor. I can only go to the 4th floor because that's the only floor I'm supposed to be going to. So anyway, yeah.
Where do you think you're going, guy?
Yeah, exactly. I have to have. Well, anyway, no, I won't go there.
No means no.
Yeah.
Basically, they figured out a way to double down on no means no.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, but anyway, this security space as maybe it sounds like my first right out of university, it just wasn't my topic, but over the years, it's really interesting. It's a hard problem, and there's some really clever things going on.
Well, you're never going to be bored, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Because somebody's always going to try to figure out a way, right? And there's new, weird, one-off scenarios that have to be addressed. I mean, it just nothing comes in cookie cutters, and it never did.
Yep.
So why would we think security does, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of before we go into the demo? What are some of the easily overlooked security issues that you found that other companies sometimes overlook?
Well, so like I said at the beginning, security is a big topic, and there are sub disciplines, if you will, within the larger security space. So in terms of like basic security, there's things like simple network security, and those are more for like network administrators, and that's not really the area I work in. I work more in. So I had mentioned earlier there are things like cross-site scripting attacks, basically general injection attacks, where your app accepts some sort of input from the user, and you're thinking it's going to be some value, and it somehow gets tweaked to fool your application.
Right.
Those are really common areas, and that's kind of, like I said, baseline security. Then the main discipline that I've been focusing on recently is single sign-on, and so that's basically it's sort of a problem that you are going to have if you're an application developer. So you may not have it today, but the idea is this: is that you're building an application, you need your users to log in. And so
Right.
You've built that app, you've built a login page, you've checked your database, it's the right password, you let the user in. And now you build a second app. The problem is now you have two apps, those are totally unrelated. Do you make the user log in a second time, and then you build the third app and a fourth app? And so single sign-on is basically the realization that that's not going to work, right? Users have to remember more passwords, which stands for security, right? You'd rather them remember fewer really good passwords. And then just from an economy standpoint, that means more work. Every time you have to build a new app, you have to set up new database or do more infrastructure. And so single sign-on is the act of centralizing that stuff. And then you get the benefit of you log in once, and then your user goes to all the apps. So that's like I said, it's in terms of being overlooked. I think a lot of people do overlook the need for that. Or don't realize it until
I was
they're
just
too
getting
far
ready to say,
down.
yeah, it may not necessarily be that but they didn't know a better way to do it, right?
Yeah,
They
exactly.
They didn't foresee that problem that would eventually arise, and I would say it's more prevalent now just because of a lot of third-party developers coming under some scrutiny because of their database is getting leaked out to, their customer database is getting leaked and exposed.
Yeah, that's absolutely concerning. I mean, the better security that we can give for our end users, the better secure the app's data. And then again, of course, on top of that, then you can even harden. So you have one single sign-on location, and you can harden that with doing two-factor authentication and things like that, which is going to improve the security of your system. But the trick there, and this actually gets back to the mobile API security with tokens, is that you need that centralized thing that produces tokens for you to log in, whether it's for authentication or for your API access. And so that's basically the thing I've been working on for many years now in terms of building open source server software that provides that feature. That's definitely a space that's been lacking for some time is a proper single sign-on server. So anyway, that's what a friend of mine, Dominic Bayer, he's from Germany, and he and I have been working together, like I said, for the last 4 or 5 years on this particular topic.
Nice. So Gus, what questions
We've built a lot of open source.
What questions do you have before we get to our demo tonight? Other than being on mute.
Darn it. Usually Google reminds me. No, I guess one of my questions is, how does, with your single sign-on server that you're going to talk about, how does that integrate with like AD or database security, like pre-existing database security?
Right. So Microsoft has a few things that do this as well. So they have something called ADFS, and the idea is that's also a single sign-on server. But that typically works just with Active Directory accounts. So you get single sign-on for your apps, but that's only if all your users are in Active Directory. I don't know a lot of domain admins who want to allow customers in the AD. And so that's the idea with Identity Server. That's the name of it. ThinkTexture Identity Server. Is that it allows you to set up single sign-on where you can put any backing database, so that the custom SQL Server database you're talking about, that can be where all yours live. They don't have to be in Active Directory.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, let's get to some demo.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So what am I going to do here? Just switch my screen?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Let's see here. I got to go find the button. Screen share. All right. So just getting into this here. So we looking okay?
Yep. And I've got the screen locked on you, so Gus, don't worry about it when you talk. You will not overtake the screen.
Good. So first thing is, again, the open source project I work on is called ThinkTexture Identity Server. And if my browser doesn't lock up here. So we basically are an open source project. We are up on GitHub. We have some documentation up here that's available. I can give you guys a link for afterwards. And we have lots of resources for getting started with being able to set this up. Basically, our goal is to be, it's a .NET based single sign-on server. We're based on Owen and Katana. So the idea is that if you want single sign-on and you want to set up a database with your custom users, you can host this out of Owen and Katana, and that means you can host out of IIS or out of out of a Windows service. We actually were even in Redmond at the MVP Summit a few months ago, and we got it running on Linux, running on ASP.NET vNext. So
what?
The whole
Nice.
yeah, absolutely. So running on Linux was actually a design goal. Is that
awesome.
we want people to be able to host this wherever they want.
Do you guys
That's
have
really
you guys
cool.
been seeing a lot more Linux backends lately? It just seems like there's a bunch of Linux stuff.
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration. I mean, I know people who, the cloud obviously is a big deal, but running a Linux machine in the cloud. I know the licensing costs are basically the same with Windows versus Linux, but the amount of memory that a Linux box needs is less, so you end up not having to pay as much. So it's sort of an interesting angle, even though the OS licensing stuff is trying really hard at Microsoft to make that the same, just that the OS has so much overhead.
Yeah, I can definitely say that I've seen a plethora of Linux products come out. Anyway, we'll put it that way.
Yeah.
It's just been crazy. And yes, you're right. The hardware footprint is a lot smaller on the Linux side.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that was an important feature for us to be able to do that. I think what Microsoft's doing with like ASP.NET vNext on and being much more open about supporting those different environments is great. And that makes people who are able to build apps and want to run them on those other platforms, that's awesome for everyone. So anyway, what we have is then, so here's our GitHub repo with all of our code. Again, I give you guys the links. We have lots of issues. I mean, people come in here. There's tons of activity with Identity Server. Again, the main thing we're supporting is a protocol called OpenID Connect, and OpenID Connect. It allows you authentication, but it also gives you, it's a superset of OAuth, and OAuth is how you obtain tokens for doing like web API calls.
Gotcha.
And so people have been really excited about this protocol, and we have lots of activity. Lots of people come up here, open up questions on the issue tracker. They ask for features. They do discussions about, could we support this or that or the other thing. People provide bug reports, which is great. So there's been a lot of activity around Identity Server, and we're really pleased. I mean, we've been working on this for about 14 months. And we plan on releasing in the next week, actually. So we just did a release candidate in the last couple weeks, and we're going to do our release next week sometime. So anyway,
no.
So yeah, nice. Go ahead.
That's cool.
Okay. So again, Identity Server is not necessarily like a shrink wrap product. It's meant to be a developer toolkit. So the idea is that you as a developer, you want to build this single sign-on for your apps, and you want to brand it, and you want to be able to totally take over control of it. And part of it, again, also is the custom database. You want to be able to pop in whatever custom backend for all your users. So we think of it more as a toolkit for building your centralized single sign-on server. So it is delivered, like I said, it's hosted as Owen and Katana, but it's delivered as a NuGet. Our particular sample code up here, this is actually the project that we work on here. Up in our GitHub repo, we have lots of samples and everything, so we have a sample host here. And just to show you here real quick, the sample host, if you're familiar with Owen and Katana, it's loading here as standard sort of Katana configuration, and then what we have here is a bunch of configuration to get Identity Server up and running, and then ultimately we're going to be doing a Katana style hosting here of middleware. So in short, what Identity Server is basically Owen middleware, and that's what allowed us to run on Linux and those other hosting environments. So here, and again, this is my dev branch. So there are a bunch of config here I have going on. The idea, though, is that you can plug in your own backend database. That's one of the big features here. So we have a pluggable system where you can go plug in your own arbitrary user store, and the idea is that Identity Server, it will do all the protocol stuff for getting single sign-on to the other apps, and then you just have to plug in the piece that interacts with your users. So you have to validate credentials, right? Username and password.
Right.
When we need to issue a token, right? The token's going to say who the user is. So it's up to your code to say, oh, well, they're in this role or that role, or maybe their first name is Bob and their last name is, whatever. So that's kind of the architecture here. Is it's a core engine, but with tons of extensibility for you to be able to tweak it and use it in your environments.
Nice.
So anyway, again, I'm not going to go too much into the code here, but the point is, here's our sample hosting project. I have another project then that represents the applications. So the thing with the protocol that we support, OpenID Connect, it works, or it's designed to work with traditional server-side web frameworks like MVC or even JSP or Ruby on Rails or whatever. But it's a protocol for also giving you support for getting tokens into your JavaScript applications. So if you want to build a pure Angular, pure client-side JavaScript app, that's another approach. And then, of course, also for mobile apps. So what we have here is the sample client project where we have those different, combinations of apps that would go off and request tokens. Okay?
Gotcha.
So the idea here, I'll run this one. This particular one's a JavaScript application. So this is an example of getting a token back to a JavaScript app. And again, these are sample projects to kind of get you started.
Remember, don't hit the red X.
I will not close our Hangout. I promise. Well, I'd like to not. Hopefully, I don't. Okay. So, so the idea here is, I got to run Identity Server first. That helps to be able to run your server.
That helps just a little bit.
So the idea here is that we have this client application. It needs to authenticate the user, and so we're going to click login. And what this does then is we're running on some IIS Express port here, 21575. We click login, and what this does is takes you over to the what's called the authorization server, or the OpenID Connect provider. It's basically your identity provider. And so this is Thinktexture Identity Server. So we ended up going over to this guy, and I'm not yet logged in, of course. So before it can issue a token back to the JavaScript app, it's got to say, who are you, of course. So I got to log in here. So I'm going to log in with my good old Bob credentials. And so a couple things about this is that when you log in with Identity Server, you have local accounts. So you could have that database that we talked about.
Gotcha.
But you can also support integrating with other external identity providers. So the idea here is that Microsoft has this like Google and Facebook login support, and that's again kind of cool. And in a sense, that's like single sign-on. And you could build 2 or 3 web apps that use those. The problem, though, with those is that in your mind you may think that's single sign-on and problem solved. But the problem is when you go and log in to App 1 with Google and then App 2 with Google and App 3 with Google, Google doesn't know that they're all really from your same company per se. And so what happens is when Google comes back to your app, Google presents an ID for the user, but it turns out that that ID is going to be different. Even though it's the same human, it's going to be a different ID for each different app that they log into. And so, in other words, what happens is Google or Facebook, they're trying to protect the user's privacy, right? They're trying to protect against these apps colluding, like behind the scenes.
Or like even a bot, I would think.
Yeah, perhaps something like that. And they're trying to protect the user against these apps colluding. Okay.
Okay.
Definitely.
So the thing is, though, for an enterprise, right, which is, again, a lot of, you could build consumer-facing apps, but even for internal apps, that's not going to necessarily fly. And so what Identity Server can do is act as a broker. So what happens is your apps, they're not trusting Google directly. They're trusting Identity Server. Identity Server then can deal with the business of talking to Google, but what then happens is when Google presents back its identifier, it's presented to Identity Server, and Identity Server correlates that to a local account that it manages. And then it sends that off to the application. So at the end of the day, you could still have 5 apps. The user can do single sign-on either with a local password or coming in through their Google or ADFS account or Azure account, and those 5 apps will see the same identity, the same user, and it will know the same, consistent set of claims and identity information across those apps.
Yeah, I could see that being a problem for performance as well if you're not able to track those individuals.
Yeah, again, I mean, for an enterprise, I've seen tons of scenarios where either employees, they can obviously log in with like their, domain credentials, but maybe if they're at home, they're not on the network, maybe the company is a little or they're kind of opening up their policy and say, well, okay, we also know your Google account, you can correlate that way. Or, of course, like a consumer-facing app where maybe you never, I've had tons of clients who use Identity Server that they don't want to do passwords at all. So we have a feature where we can actually turn this entire password piece off, and we just authenticate with external providers.
Nice.
But the thing is, though, you still want your data for the user. You want your set of information. You need to know, maybe application-specific information, and so that's why you need your own identity provider.
Gotcha.
Okay. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and hit log on here. This is now going to say I'm logged in, and it's going to continue with my login flow. And here, the idea is that, okay, I logged in, but I'm not yet going back to the app, because I'm sure all of us have seen this sort of screen before where you get prompted. And you basically say, hey, hold on. This app, it's asking to get this information about you. You've seen this with Facebook, I'm sure, with Google. And again, in the protocol here, OpenID Connect, it's based on the OAuth protocol. And the intent with that protocol, or at least the history behind it, is that we're trying to give permissions to this application to obtain either access or information about the user. And so when that is a third party, basically, then consent makes sense. Right? Do I want to give away my email to this random app that I'm trying to log into? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And so that's where this consent screen comes in. So
or sensitive material, on your devices.
Absolutely. So that's getting back to your API scenario. That would be a very similar thing where maybe what you're trying to do is you're building a mobile app that wants to get a token to use some back-end service on behalf of the user, right? Does the user want to trust that app you installed onto your iPhone to do that? That's the point of this consent screen. Nice. Now, in an enterprise, maybe that doesn't make sense, right? So in an enterprise, there is no trust issue because you wrote the API and you're also writing the app.
Right.
So this screen can be disabled. Again, that's just an option. And again, that's us trying to be flexible for the different sort of use cases that people use single sign-on for. Cool. All right. So I'll go ahead and pass that along, and then what happens is we end up returning back to the application. Now, this application is a JavaScript-based application. There's no real server-side piece to this. So the idea is that all I wanted to do was authenticate. And so what happens is, if you notice here in the URL, we end up getting this thing called an ID token. And so this ID token is basically the authentication token. It's handed back to the JavaScript, and if you notice there, it's handed back in the hash fragment. That is basically how we pass parameters back to client-side applications. The interesting thing about this is that, I don't know if you guys know, but the hash fragment in the URL, the thing about it is that it does not travel to the server. So this is how you basically pass parameters that are meant only for the client-side piece. And so what this ID token is basically the authentication information that the user just consented to. The format here, if you guys can see it, is this thing here. And what this is something called a JSON web token. A JSON web token, or a JWT, also pronounced as JOT, basically is a way to encode identity information. And the trick with it is there's a signature on this. So it is signed by the server, and therefore the consumer, this app, can trust that it's actually legit.
Cool.
And so what we ended up getting here, this is the contents of it. And really, I actually clicked just the login. When you do just login, and if you remember the consent screen, it basically just said, I'm giving the application the rights to know my user identifier. That's basically it. And so that's this thing called the subject claim. This was my user's unique ID. Okay? And maybe that's all the app needs. All the app needs to do, if all they need to do is correlate the same user over time, that's probably fine. But if the app needs more, then there's a way to request more information. So here I'm going to click this button, and this will go back to the login provider. Okay. Now notice I didn't get prompted to log in again, right? I'm still logged in. That makes sense because it's single sign-on. That's kind of the whole point. But now this particular request was asking for more data. In this case, it was asking for first and last name and maybe my email address. Okay. So we have a nice feature where you can pick and choose what you want to consent to, and you hit yes. And now when this token comes back to the app now has, well, more data. So now we actually know the guy's name and their first name and their last name and their email. Okay? So that's basically, in a sense, single sign-on. If I ran now a new app and that app needed to go to IdentityServer to log me in, you know, bam, we'd be right logged in. We wouldn't have to provide credentials again, and that's kind of the idea. Okay?
Yeah.
Nice.
Now, this is just the authentication piece. We didn't actually do the API piece. So in other words, what I've done is I've authenticated to the JavaScript, but you know, most JavaScript apps, they don't stand alone, right? They typically need to call an API. So if you're going to do that, then well, first of all, you need an API to call. So in my demo here, I have another API, another project here. So I actually have an API. So I'll run this guy real quick. Okay, so this is yet another project, and this is just an empty page. But the point is, I have a web API project in here that we can call into, and go request some, in this case, some identity data. So if I try to request this directly, hold on, I actually forgot my URL here. So this is under my, I think it's just called identity, actually. Yeah, basically this makes sense. It says, hey, you're not logged in. You're not providing anything to prove your identity. So in short, I try to call the API with no token. Okay.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
I want to get a token for this thing. So that's the job of my JavaScript here. I want to get a token. So when you make this request over to the single sign-on provider, you can say different levels of what you want. So the first button here was saying, oh, just give me my unique ID for the user. I don't care about their name. I just want their unique ID. And this button here was saying, oh, request their unique ID, but also their first and last name and email. So this button here is basically saying, hey, I want your first, your last name, your ID, but I also want an access token. And this access token is, I want to call this backend API. Okay. So when we do this guy, again, we go back over here. We're still signed in, okay? So we don't have to log in again, but we're getting now a prompt not only for that identity data that I had talked about, but now an access to an application. And so these are, like dummy permissions we just kind of hacked up for our demo here. But the idea is that an application may have read access or write access. And so we are requesting that access. So now when I hit yes, the trick here now is I'm now going to get back 2 tokens. I got back 1 token that has this information, the personal information, and that's intended for the client app to know who the user was. Now, I'm also requesting a second token, which we call the access token. And the access token basically is intended for the API. So in our response here, we ended up getting back this ID token. That's the same thing I showed you a minute ago. Now we're getting back a second token. Okay. This access token is the one that you actually then pass in the authorization header to the API that you're trying to access. So now what's going to happen, and by the way, here's the access token contents. Okay, it has very similar stuff, right? It knows that the user is ID 884, whatever. That's the same ID that was over here. I didn't configure the access token to necessarily have other information like their first and last name. That these are all configurable, like what you put in here, all configurable. But the point in then is we also have what set of permissions that the user consented to. So again, maybe consent doesn't make sense for a corporate environment, but maybe if you're building a consumer-facing third-party sort of thing, it makes more sense. But the point here is that the access token that I'm going to use to hit the API, it has the permissions that were actually consented to or granted. Okay? Cool. And so these are called scopes. Scopes basically represent what you're allowed to do. Okay. So now I have some other button here somewhere. Here we go. Call the service. So I'm going to hit this button, and what this does is from the JavaScript, it actually hits my API, okay, and it passes this. Well, it's actually this access token here along. Yeah. Okay. So the API now has to validate this thing. Okay, and so the way it validates it is just like I said for this guy. This thing is signed. There's actually, if you go back to IdentityServer here, it has a certificate that gets used to sign all of the tokens. And there's some metadata here that we can go to, and when you go and follow one of these URLs, here's the actual metadata, and what happens is we have the X509 certificate information that's being used to sign the tokens. So the web API will validate the token against this certificate. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, so you guys are still with me, hopefully?
Yeah, no, so you can, so I'm assuming if one would want to, they could have multiple different layers, right? Different tokens and things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, this is just really scratching the surface in terms of what we're doing. When you request a token, you can request a token for many different APIs. Right. So the idea is that when you make that request, you actually have a token that actually works at more than one API. That's kind of a nice, in a sense, kind of like an optimization. And that's what these permissions here kind of model. Each little permission in here can represent, you know, at a coarse-grained level, do you have access to an entire API? Now, there's still authorization checks that you need to do in the API, but this is sort of, you know, this is like the coarse-grained check, like, in other words, like the hotel room key that I was talking about, am I at the right hotel? Right? It may not let me into every room. That's further authorization that needs to be done. But is it a Hilton, you know, room card versus a Marriott or something like that? Anyway, so if I click my button up here, I think this button here actually calls the service. And yeah, down here, that's the AJAX call. And all my service is doing is, and we could probably run this. Let's run this in Fiddler. Hopefully this doesn't screw up the Hangout. So I could run this in Fiddler.
The last words he ever said. No.
Yeah. I'll call my service. Go back here. And there we go. I think that's my call. This is where I actually made the call to that endpoint. Remember, it was /identity, if you remember. Yeah. And here is exactly where that token is being passed. So the JavaScript is passing the token. Here's that exact same token. So it ends in like -X, IG, something like that. Yeah, that looks like it right there. Okay? And so that is what the client, the JavaScript, is passing to the API to tell the API, here I am, you know, this is who I am, and you know, I should be able to get in.
Cool.
Nice. No,
So
this is really nice and clean, and I like the way this looks, man.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
me too.
this is the server that we've worked on. We've been working on for, like I said, for 14 months now. It was not, trivial to build. But like I said, we've been doing this for a long time, and we know the kinds of things people need to do with these token services. So we have quite a bit of extensibility and support for satisfying those kinds of kind of requirements. Around this, we've built other helpers, basically. If you will indulge me for a few more minutes.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely. While you're doing that real quick, I just wanted to thank our viewers of the live show. Thank you very much. We appreciate you you sticking around and enjoying the show, because I know that I'm enjoying this, and really, frankly, that's all that matters. So,
Cool.
You're up, Brock.
Yep. So one of the other helpers we have here is then, so like back in the API, I just said that we passed the token and it was just somehow accepted. So one of the things we then have added around this infrastructure that we're building is the ability to validate those tokens. So the token, like I said before, is usually something called a JOT, a JSON Web Token, which has like a digital signature on it. So there's some cryptography involved with validating that and doing the right parsing and everything. Fortunately, we don't really have to do much of that. Or at least manually. So what we've done is we have some NuGet packages that basically you just plug in front of your API. So these are also middleware that plug into Owen and Katana, and so what we have is a middleware that plugs in here that basically says, hey, we're using bearer tokens from IdentityServer, and what we do is you point it at that URL I showed you earlier. So again, this URL is the URL to the metadata. And what ends up happening is in your API, it is dynamically downloading the certificate that we are trusting to check the signature on the tokens. So really, it's like one line of code to then be able to accept tokens in your API. We then have an additional check here, which is, remember I said earlier that the token has these permissions in it. Those are called scopes. And the application had asked for both the write and the read scope. Those are for the API access. My API is basically saying, oh, by the way, when you look in the token, it better have write access, because if you don't have write access, the guy's not allowed in.
Nice.
So it's kind of your coarse-grained check on the way in to make sure your token is allowed.
Right, and it's configured right. Yeah. No, this is really neat. Yeah.
So that's one sample. That sample obviously is a very JavaScript-heavy sample. The whole protocol that we're implementing with OpenID Connect, allows for server-side applications and mobile applications. And so our samples, like I had said earlier, we have lots of different samples that are kind of showing you those different contexts, those different environments, and how you would go about obtaining a token. I don't really have a mobile one per se, like an iOS sort of project here, but a desktop application actually is pretty much a very similar example for a mobile app. It's like a native, application. And so we also have a WPF example here, which again, I kind of joke about how beautiful this UI is. That's about as pretty as a WPF UI is possible. And so the same idea, it's very much the same kind of buttons, where this is just a different type of app. And the point being here is that this thing is what you would do in like an iOS app or an Android app, or even a Cordova app if you were going to build a Cordova app running as a JavaScript, but it's still an installed app. And very same kind of buttons to do the things we're talking about. The point being here, though, is that for this native app, the trick is with the JavaScript app, it was pretty straightforward, because like I just redirected, right? I just redirected over to the single sign-on provider in my browser. For native apps, that's a little tricky, right? Well, the way they work typically is they actually pop up an embedded browser. The idea being you don't want to enter your credentials into the app itself. The whole point here was single sign-on. I don't want to necessarily, it might be a third-party app. It may not be trusted. And so the idea is that we do a browser pop-up. And this is very much how the OAuth specification suggests that we do these mobile apps, is that they're not trusted, is that we do a browser pop-up. So same thing, I'm going to log in with Alice here. Same sort of consent screen that we had talked about before. I'll give allow, and then you notice now we ended up getting the same sort of token information back here in my native mobile app, for example. And then I can call my API service and get the same sort of results. Okay.
Okay.
So what I've just shown you is a combination of single sign-on and getting access tokens to call APIs. And those are, it's a little subtle. They're actually two different things going on here. But the cool thing about the server we built with IdentityServer is that it implements the single protocol that gives you both of those together.
Wow. Nice.
Okay, I know that was totally like, I know I just went 100 miles an hour through that. So security is not. Let me put it this way: it's taken me lots of years just on this stuff to get my head wrapped around what I just went through, so that I could show it to you that quickly. It's not something that necessarily comes overnight.
No.
I want. Yeah, and I want people to know. I mean, what we just saw was, even though you did go kind of quick, but it wasn't ridiculous. I mean, I was able to stick with you. So this was really, really cool. Now tell our listeners how they can pay you. I mean, tell them how they can find you,
Right.
Find out more about what you do and how and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So again, I blog at my website brockallen.com. I'm on Twitter. What usually happens is, so I work with Dominic. He's in Germany, and I'm here in the U.S. And when we're not actually, we're both consultants, and so when we're not actually doing consulting jobs, we basically work together. We work over Skype. We kind of do pair programming all day long, and so we're building this because it's needed. It's needed to clients, and over the years we decided to open source this because it just really is good for leveraging. Obviously, it's a good promotion for our own consulting, but it's just needed in the community. So I don't know. It's just kind of overall a nice sort of ecosystem we got going. So anyway,
well, it makes it better, right? It makes it better. It gives it those extra layers that you don't necessarily have time to get to. You know what I mean?
There's a great amount of activity around IdentityServer. We have lots of contributions. We have tons of people who even on the beta were already using it. And like I said, we've done token services in the past, and our last one, which is called IdentityServer 2, that was really successful. My biggest client had about 10 million logins a week through the last version.
That's pretty significant.
That was pretty. I would say that was a success. And so this new version, I got to say, in the last 6 months we've been working on. We've been working on it for 14 months, but in the last 6 months, it's had so much activity than the last. So again, I think a lot of people have been waiting for the protocol and waiting for something like this to really fit in. So yes, we work together. We work on this open source. I think it's good for the community. It helps us, pay our mortgage. And so when clients come in, if they're European, they tend to go to Dominic. If they're in North America, they tend to come work with me.
Perfect.
Awesome, man. Well, so we have a question that we ask every guest. We ask them two questions. So what tech, it'll be all right.
Okay.
What tech or programming practice do you see going extinct within the next 3 years? Or what tech niche do you see exploding within the next year? While you're thinking about your answer, charities that I want you all to know about: Hopeline, a domestic violence and prevention and support organization. Go check them out. That's Hopeline, L-I-N-E. And then Hope for Young Adults with Cancer. If you want to donate to a good cause, donate it to that. Also, an application called Healthy Me. It's called healthymehub.com for more information. This keeps people from readmittance back into emergency rooms in a way for, I'd say, a HIPAA-compliant way to keep your doctors informed of your progress and things of that nature. All right, back to you, sir. Which one do you want to answer?
Well, so the obvious one about so again, so rephrase the second one. It was basically what undiscovered technology is going to be coming out in the next 3 years?
yeah, exactly. Because I want to know so I can go put my money in it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
No, but what niche do you see kind of exploding in the next year?
I mean, to be honest, this is going to be a totally cheap answer, but I think OpenID Connect. So the thing that we're focusing on with our security protocol, I think that's going to be like the security protocol to rule them all.
Okay.
Because it does single sign-on, it does APIs. APIs are hot, and apps aren't going away.
Right.
I don't know if I have an answer for your other one. Like, what security technology is going to die, or what technology is going to die off?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in the security space, I think the older WSTAR, those are going to slowly decline. WS Fed, WS Trust, SAML 2. Although they're going to be like cockroaches, they're going to stay around, unfortunately. But
well, of course.
Until the end of time, like ActiveX. No.
They kind of.
And Windows 95.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. XP. Yes. No. So that's interesting to say, but what do you like? How do you live your life? Do you live your life in a bunker? No, I'm just kidding. When you go to some of these, when you approach some of these applications and stuff that you want to check out, do you like vet them? Do you do a good? Do you go all in, or are you like a doomsdayer or whatever?
So the funny thing is, I work on the security stuff. One of the major target audiences is mobile apps.
Sure.
And the funny thing is, I don't run many mobile apps myself. I know how people write them, and I don't trust them. Basically, I am such the old grumpy, old fogey, and it sounds bad, but I mean, in general, because I know how much effort it takes to be a specialist in security, and I focus on this stuff, and I screw it up myself.
So you're like, there's no way that you did. Well, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's no way you were able to overcome that and make a unicorn video game. No. So that answers my question, though. But
that's kind of a sad answer, actually. Anyway, I'm trying to help make it easier so that other people don't have to be the security specialist. So hopefully, I'm improving the situation, even though I myself am not necessarily all on board yet. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dangerous. It's a dangerous road, right? Like we all hope. We're just hoping that guys like you come up with these awesome solutions, so that we, when it comes to crunch time, don't necessarily have to worry about it.
And it's not trivial to build this stuff and get it right. So we're doing our best. But yeah, I'm definitely an old. Dominic and he was just making fun of me today because I still use a paper calendar. I literally don't. I don't use Outlook's calendar or any kind of calendar on my phone. So, so maybe that hopefully gives you a little bit more insight to maybe why I don't use mobile apps as much as maybe I should.
Gotcha.
No, I mean it's people don't think enough about that stuff. How all of this, how it's connected, right? The one Google account.
Yeah.
Like just tons of people out there. How much data is stored in that account?
Oh yeah.
So Gus, do you have any final thoughts on the end of this wonderful episode?
No, I just think that this was a great episode to have because in light of our current environment, security is one of the foremost things that everyone brings up. There's a lot of healthcare problems, credit card problems, security problems across the board. And I think that when people understand that there are things out there that can help them, secure certain sites very quickly and easily, it's something that everyone needs to know.
Absolutely.
Yep.
The landscape, especially like I said with APIs, is changing so fast, and what people's assumptions are what get you when it comes to security. And so their assumptions about, I can just do it the way I've been doing it in 5 years ago or whatever, that doesn't fly. You have to be aware of what you have to be aware that you don't know, and so seek out or vet or validate that what you're doing is actually the right thing.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've run into recently in the last couple of years is people just being very stagnant and going, well, that's how we did it yesterday, so that's how we'll do it today. And I keep saying that you have to keep an open mind and continue on and look forward. You can't just look through blinders towards what you did and just recreate it again and again and again. It won't fly.
Right.
And that's everywhere. That's not just security. That's everywhere.
Sure.
So I totally agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. Well, guys, everybody that again watching the live show, if you didn't get a chance to watch the live show, it's okay. You can always watch back on here at CodeCastSTL.com. We're going to have more information about what happened during this episode. We're going to get those links from Brock and for GitHub and all that. Again, thank you so much, Brock, for taking out time. I hope you had as much fun as I had fun listening to you talk and show off your stuff tonight, man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you guys very much.
Oh, hey, thank you.
No problem. And to all of our fans, we love you and thank you for your support of the show. So from the entire CodeCast crew, good coding. We're out.
Good night.